Thank you so much to Violetta Volna for reaching out and supplying me with a code. If you'd like to avoid story spoilers, feel free to use the chapter selection I've left in the description. But I will be using boss fight footage later in the video, which might contain some story nuggets as well. Proceed at your own risk. This is Code Bunny. The planet Lumina has a visitor every 25 years, the comet Ylister. This comet drops shards down to the surface of the planet as it passes by. The residents of Lumina, namely the technology organization Lagos Hyperbolics, realized they could use these shards to level up their operation, a resource capable of powering cities and appliances and whatnot. The shards are kinda like Mako energy if you're Final Fantasy VII literate. Lagos Hyperbolics has also used this power to create instruments of war like battle suits, the same kind worn by our two main protagonists. Let's start with Axel. This guy works for Lagos in order to pay for his sick brother's hospital bills. His brother Lucian has an incurable disease and he believes that Lagos will eventually find the means to save him. In the story proper, he's sent on a mission after a large explosion was seen in a city. Shortly afterwards, he runs into a mysterious figure, Lune. Axel doesn't want to fight, but one ensues anyway, with the mysterious kid's suit being damaged. Two others quickly come to his rescue, proclaiming them as Mad Bunny. They also proclaim that this was all a misunderstanding, so they just leave. We then head back up to the Lagos Hyperbolic HQ to meet the rest of the crew, the lead scientist Igusa and the mechanic Raffi. But new to the crew is a member of the Zondu army, Hazel. She really doesn't matter at all for Axel's story, so we'll circle back around momentarily. After everyone is introduced, the CEO of Lagos puts out a call to take out the new threat, Mad Bunny. So from here on out, Axel will go on missions running into the members of Mad Bunny. He's constantly asking them questions during their run-ins, trying to make sense of the whole thing, eventually learning that there was a small civilization that lived in this forest called the Nyx. The land deteriorated and was sold to the Zondu army, evicting the people that lived there. Yikes number one. And the kid from Mad Bunny, Lune, was wearing a suit that was keeping him alive. That suit was damaged in the fight and he's dying again. Yikes number two. Axel grows more and more uncertain about his work at Lagos, until he finally tracks down Lune and it's revealed that Lune is actually Axel's brother Lucian.
What?
Turns out the big bad is the CEO of Lagos, Solil. Now this woman lost her lover long ago to the same disease that is affecting Lucian. Inspired by research from Igusa's mother, she believes that the Ylister comet contains aether of every person who has ever died on Lumina. Aether, by the way, is a magical force that surrounds all things. Some people are more in tune with their aether, which allows them to use it for magic or other things. Anyway, Solil kidnapped Lucian and others with high aether affinity to figure out how to cure his disease so she could in turn use the comet to resurrect her lover and then cure them. This resulted in a lot of torturous experiments for Lucian. But Axel fights past Raffi, who defends Lagos' goals until he reaches Solil. Axel smacks her around and gives her a pep talk until they walk away talking about their feelings. Oh, okay, alright. Let's cover Hazel's story really quickly. So both protagonists go through the same fights and mostly the same stages, meaning they interact with a lot of the same characters. Hazel begins in the city and has an encounter with Lune, destroying his suit. Back up on the space station, she's introduced to everyone, including the pacifist Axel. She has run-ins with Mad Bunny, with them slowly convincing her that Lagos might be full of shit. But then it's revealed that her childhood friend Shouko is one of the members and she's mad at Hazel for killing their other friend, Ash. He was the reason Hazel enlisted in Zondu's military, but one day on a routine mission he's informed of a sudden promotion via a message from Solil. But in order to get the promotion, he has to kidnap the native Nyx clan and bring them to the Lagos Hyperbolics facility. The man doesn't like the sound of that, so in an act of defiance, he kills all the surrounding Zondu troops. Was there not a better way to handle that? Like, oh, I don't know, maybe don't kill the soldiers immediately. Yeah, they were making like vaguely xenophobic remarks, but I feel like Ash could have rebelled in a way more effective way. Hazel heard the gunfire and saw Ash the exact way he didn't want her to see him, slashing people down because of a differing ideology. In a split-second decision, Hazel picks up Ash's sword and kills him. This section really made no sense to me. But then come to find out, Shouko saw the whole thing and blames Hazel for Ash's death, which, I mean, yeah, she could have tried to calm him down, but also, why the f did Ash start swinging on the soldiers? Was there really not a better way to handle that? Go talk to Hazel. You two have powwows all the time about helping people. Save the Nyx natives in a more passive way. Trick the other soldiers. For all they know, some of these soldiers would have helped them if they had just talked to them. But shortly after this flashback, Hazel defeats Soleil, and that's that. They both walk away together just like she did with Axel. I'm sorry to say, but I wasn't feeling this story. For starters, I never grew to care about any of the characters in it. Axel is the pacifist of the group who's always looking for a non-violent solution. It was giving me late Mega Man X vibes with how much he didn't want to fight, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was just really never interested in his story. I feel for a protagonist who lost someone they care for and then they come back in an unexpected way, but Lune was inconsistent. In the flashback showing Soleil putting Lucien into the suit for the first time, he doesn't remember who Axel is, likely due to the effects of retrieving Aether from the comet. That much is explained. But when his story starts and he has his run-in with Mad Bunny, why does Lune shut down Faye when she asks if that's Axel, acting like he does know him but doesn't want to talk to him right now? Did the other members tell Lune about his previous life? If so, how did they know about Axel previously? I don't think they had previously met. Did Lune get his memories back somehow after the rescue? That's fine, but I don't think we were shown that at all. Did this corruption we see in the level before have something to do with it? Again, I don't recall this information being handed to us. Hazel is a certified bitch when the story starts, but slowly she starts to open up as things move along. I enjoyed the time we get of Hazel and Axel bonding. They were some of the only moments where I really felt like I got to know these characters. I did find it weird how inconsequential the two protagonists were to each other's story. They do have their talks like I mentioned, but these talks are more for fleshing out both of their histories. But both characters' pasts are explored further later on, so it's more in depth I suppose, but it's information retreaded. I never got the impression from these talks that either character said something that convinced the other to leave Lagos and begin their transformation arc. Not every story with dual protagonists has to be that way, it's just interesting that that's not the case. There were even some moments early on where the group had differing ideals, but then we spend so much time listening to characters that don't really meet the mark. For what it's worth, I did enjoy the quirks we saw from the cast. Igusa has the hots for Hazel and is a scientist. They make a few mentions of how she's an alcoholic for grape juice. She's also fully aware that what they're doing is potentially cataclysmic. Okay, would have loved to see some reasoning behind such a radical view besides for science and my mom. Axel has a dream to be a famous ice skater and also take care of his brother. Raffi is a mechanic and can make really good coffee, but she also turns on the heroes because that's just how loyal she is to Soleil, and I found that motivation to be pretty weak. And as a side note, in Axel's campaign, if you beat Raffi, the fight will just start over because narratively, Axel doesn't want to fight. I beat this fight twice before I realized it had to be a timed thing. Last long enough for Raffi to give up as well. So I waited, and eventually got frustrated enough to pause the game to quit out and, oh, you were supposed to use the menu to pause and quit the fight? F you. That's clever, but still f you. Shouko, Hazel's childhood friend, is actually the daughter of Soleil, but this information really has no bearing on anything. It only gives Shouko a reason to be in the Lagos HQ to break out Faye and Lune who are in captivity. I don't recall there being any drama that arises from Shouko hesitating to stop her mom or something. There are mentions to it, it's not like it doesn't go completely unnoticed, but there's nothing impactful. The only two characters that talk directly to Soleil are Axel, Hazel, and Lucien in a flashback. Faye was really just another member of Mad Bunny, Lune was confusing, and Ash was a moron. But you know what I think my biggest thing about the story was? The way it was presented. Just to be clear, I enjoyed the way the game looks in general. Axel and Hazel's attacks have great visual effects, boss attacks are always readable and have some great presence, and stages look amazing with some really impressive set pieces. My gripes, like I mentioned, are focused on the way the story was told. And I really do hate to bring this up because I know this was a small team and the fact that they even made a thing is incredible and the art is subjective anyway, but I thought the way the story was told was pretty lifeless. The portraits for the characters talking confused me in the early game. When I was only on my first playthrough and I had no idea who these characters were, seeing these portraits change even though the same character was talking was disorienting. Like for Hazel and Axel, seeing their portraits with them in and out of their suits made it slightly confusing to keep track of who was who. I also think these portraits could have been a little more detailed. This is an unfair comparison, I'm aware, but when I think of a game delivered entirely in text and characters that can't emote much, I think of the original Mystery Dungeon games. Those character portraits always did a great job of displaying how a character was feeling at any given moment. This is similar to Code Bunny's character sprites, which were also a little small for my liking. The definable features like Hazel's hair and Axel's big ears were a bit hard to distinguish. I did eventually learn the names and faces for the most part, but it was a lot in the beginning, especially while also trying to learn the game mechanics. Code Bunny is a 2D action platformer. You'll progress linearly through each stage with a boss waiting for you at the end. You're ranked at the end of each stage based on how high your largest chain of actions were and, most importantly, how quickly you completed the stage. Both of our characters can move left and right as well as jump, but their other utilities are unique to each character. Starting with Axel, he has a 3-hit kicking combo on square, a stomp on the right bumper which can be used to get back to the ground quickly, even if there's a bit of an animation lock after you land, making it undesirable for speedruns. But I think that's because the stomp is better used to bounce off of enemies. But then we have his spin. Left bumper is the button you will be spamming in this game, believe me. Axel will enter a spin after pressing it. While spinning, he will avoid certain attacks and bounce off of enemies, damaging them. Activating the spin will also grant a small burst of speed, and if you do this at the height of Axel's jump, you can gain some serious distance. The spin is great as a platforming tool, but it's also a great means of combat. Ricocheting off enemies feels awesome. It can get a little unruly after you've bounced off of multiple, but it's a fun quirk to work around. Using the indestructible ladybug enemies to ping-pong up to higher ledges is seriously stellar. And as far as bosses, it absolutely wrecks them. In Faye's fight, when she goes against a wall, you can spin into her and then get a few extra hits as you bounce back from the wall. There are several scenarios where you can score multiple hits on these bosses or keep the rhythm going and bounce on them. Then there's Axel's EX meter. When damaging enemies with his spin attack, he builds up this meter. It takes 3 successful spin attacks to max out. When it's full, he can use one of his 3 special attacks. Think of these like the trick moves from Sonic Advance 2. By spinning and then pressing square, he can rush forward. By pressing up and square, he gains a bit of a double jump. And by pressing down and square, he'll perform this downward kick. This one was my favorite. It was great for bosses. The dash was okay, and the double jump, more on that in a second. Let's talk Hazel. She has a 4-hit combo with her sword. She can also jump and swing it beneath her, but I never use that. On right bumper, Hazel will shoot an arrow to mark an enemy, and when marked, using the left bumper will dash her to that enemy and attack them. She also gains an extra jump after dashing to an enemy. Jumping and then using the mark to slash over to that enemy and then immediately mark another enemy and travel a significant distance was exhilarating. It leads to extremely fast stage progression, and I loved it. Hazel can also mark more than one enemy at a time, allowing her to zip to multiple targets with one slash. This isn't ever really needed, but it is neat. By simply pressing the left bumper, Hazel will parry attacks and enemies too. And I'm not sure if this was intentional, but this gives Hazel the means to mount some of these bosses. By just spamming the left bumper and hitting left and right repeatedly, I could semi-consistently parry and mark bosses and deal good damage. It was even easier when they had other attacks going off. I assume this is just because it gave my parry more hitboxes to bounce off of, but it was awesome. And finally, Hazel has her karma system. After letting a combo end or hitting a marked enemy, she will gain a point of karma. The more karma she has, the more damage she'll take. But if her karma exceeds her maximum health, she'll enter karma mode, where all of her attacks deal 4 times damage, but any attack that lands will immediately send her into critical health. But Hazel can dump her karma by hitting enemies with the warp slash. The thing about this karma system, in stages I have no problem with it. I don't really see the need to intentionally build it up during the stages because the enemies are taken out so quickly anyway, but during boss fights, it's more of an inconvenience. Towards the latter parts of the adventure, bosses' attacks can get a bit cray-cray. Projectiles flying everywhere, projectiles that spawn more projectiles when they hit something, and as far as tools go to get around these attacks, Hazel doesn't have much. The jump isn't anything spectacular, and the parry works for the most part, but after hitting the parry, she'll kinda jump forward a bit, making exact positioning sketchy. And consistently hitting parries on these slow-moving projectiles isn't easy. Pair this with the karma system, and there were times I unintentionally built up karma and then took a hit that dropped my health down to critical, all because I was doing well. Part of me wants to say that I just need to get better at watching my karma meter and use the slash attack to dump the meter, but taking my eyes off of the fight periodically to check my meter isn't exactly smooth to me. This is kind of why I defaulted to using that bouncing parry trick with the bosses. My fingers and controller hated hated me during boss fights, but I wasn't having my health bar deleted in one hit anymore. Dying in one hit wasn't a problem for Axel. He took default damage the entire time, but that doesn't mean he gets off scot-free. His EX meter rubs me the wrong way, but my issue here is that if Axel's EX meter is full and he takes damage, an Aether barrier will automatically shield him from all damage, but also dump the meter. But due to enemies always having a hitbox, I found myself sliding into enemies all the time and taking accidental damage, thus getting rid of my EX meter. I would have loved to use Axel's mid-air jump or his super dash attack, but it felt like I never had my meter long enough to use them. Like right here, I wanted to do Axel's double jump because I thought I had enough meter, but Aether barrier had taken it from me a second ago, so I took the jump thinking I could use that ability, but I didn't have the resource. Again, I understand this is likely just a skill issue type thing and I need to get better at the game, but I can't help but think enemies in these types of platformers shouldn't have constantly active hitboxes. I felt this as both characters too. I know a big part of the game is combat and defeating enemies, but they already have attacks. The little wheelie guys rush in from off screen and are satisfying to parry as Hazel. The arrow guys have a shield that you have to bust before you can damage them, and if you take too long you get an arrow to the face. The big turtles are tanky and will require a little more time in order for their star attack to come down. I think they all have plenty of great attacks that are readable and engage you in that dance to outmaneuver and take them down. But I also feel like I'm being punished for dancing around in close quarters when I take damage from just engaging in combat. Hazel seemed to have a more difficult time, I find. The last slash of her basic combo will see her moving slightly forward. I hated this because it always put me inside the enemy and that's a free hit for them. But out of the two, I found Axel's campaign to be the easier. Thanks to the Aether barrier, he rarely takes damage. The basic kick combo has such pitiful range that the only worthwhile attack you have is the spin, and the spin covers offense and defense at the same time, so it was never a problem. The roller skates he uses didn't help with things feeling imprecise though. These, along with his spin, led to me colliding with enemies and in turn, his stages feeling slippery. That being said, the levels themselves were highlights. They each had their gimmicks that made traveling in them fun. Yokkaido and its wind currents were fun to shoot myself across the stage with. The magic hat portals in Wonderland had some clever moments, but I honestly would have loved to see this concept pushed further. The first of the really challenging levels was Lagos Hyperbolic's HQ. The section where you leave the station and are jumping across these floating ships was tense. Finding out that Hazel can mark the ships made it a bit easier. Ylister Core is a pretty easy stage for the most part. The gimmick sees the top and bottom screen wrapping. If you fall to the bottom of the screen, you come out at the top of the screen. There are several moments that take great advantage of this concept, but at the very end of the stage, there is a huge jump that takes some work to cross. Hazel can't jump across normally. She has to slash to the only visible ladybug and then aerial parry that enemy to have enough momentum to make it the rest of the way across. And then Axel will have to perfectly spin jump on top of the ladybug to make it across. Let me tell you, I struggled with that singular jump for a bit on both characters for both of their story runs, and then also for both characters on both of their arcade runs. Whew, it's a good jump. It's a good jump. While I was playing, I kept kicking myself for missing the higher pathways. My classic Sonic the Hedgehog brain has me wired to think the top paths are always the fastest. And while that is the case for a few of the stages here, most of the routes are similar in time, with some stages like the Nyx Forest being completely linear aside from a few branching pathways. Your in-stage time comes down to you using the tools you have in a super precise way throughout the entire stage. This includes the boss fights. Disappointingly, most are pretty easy to just spam through. I only had to really be careful with my positioning for a few because the real way to win was through using the parry and the spin to nullify any attack that comes your way. The only real exception was the final boss where my left bumper and D-pad hated me. And Axel's fight was pretty tame thanks to the reduced damage taken and the forgiving spin. It only got on my nerves when I would bounce off of her and be sent down one of the bottomless pits. I suppose that's what I get for being reckless. Overall, I enjoyed my time with Code Bunny. It should be noted that I don't have a lot of time with games like this. My experience with 2D titles isn't as plentiful as it could be, but I also think there are some aspects that could be improved here. The story, at least for me, wasn't very interesting. Narratives like this are often good at latching onto personal struggles that you can relate to the events on screen, so I guess I just don't have anything to latch onto personally. Therefore, I didn't find myself myself invested in the plot at all. But even from a writing perspective, I think the characters do have a tendency to drone on about how peace and love will save the day every time, and I respect that and honestly agree with it. But I felt like characters, especially when Axel is having his emotional rants, are talking in circles. In these talks, they go on and on about the same thing until the bad guy gives up and eventually agrees. And I'm sorry, I really don't want to come across as a buzzkill, but that's just how I felt. As a video game, I have very little problems. Most of my gripes are centered around how the level gimmicks aren't pushed even further. As a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, as a fan of fast-paced 2D games, I would have loved to see more intricate and wacky level design. And bring more grind rails. Axel had an exclusive level utilizing grind rails, and I would have loved more of that. How is that only in one level? I enjoyed the game's visuals, but I will reiterate how I would love to see more detail next time. This gave me the vibe of a Game Boy Color title with the small and simple sprites the characters were rocking. But I think moving up to Game Boy Advanced or 16-bit quality in general would do a lot to alleviate my gripes. Music was also not quite my jam. I liked the track that played on the Lagos HQ menu, but that might be because I heard it so much when doing those room talk things. And I also really liked the track that played when Axel and Hazel are having their heart-to-heart. The stage themes and boss tracks, though, I couldn't hum you one, sorry to say. And again, I really do apologize if this review was a bit negative, but I only give criticism because I care and I want this team to continue to grow. I want to see a sequel to Code Bunny and for it to absolutely knock my f***ing socks off. Now that the groundwork has been laid, the only place to go is up. And if any of the team is watching, I know you guys can do it. And I will personally be rooting for you every step of the way. And for any of you out there who want to show your support, I do recommend you give Code Bunny a shot. You might even find more enjoyment than I did, but either way, show the development team that you want to see their efforts continue. Next time we meet, I will actually be diving into another Crab's Treasure. I am very much looking forward to getting into that. I want to thank my $10 patron, WhiteGhost117. Thank you so much as always, man. If you want to join the Patreon to gain exclusive rewards and privileges and exclusive content, please take a look at the link in the description. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching, so thanks for stopping by and have a great day.